The last 20 years have seen a number of phenomenal games that you could definitely make a case for being in the greatest of all time conversation. But what if we turn back the clock and looked at a list from 2 decades ago to see what games were considered the best back then? Today, I'm going to take a look at a top 100 video games of all time list made by IGN back in April 2003. I'm only going to be talking about the top 20 games on the list in this video, but I'll leave a link in the description if you want to see every single game on the list. At number 20, we have Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2. I'm a little surprised this game made the list considering it was only about 2.5 years old when this list was made. To put this game in the top 20 best games of all time is pretty bold, but hey, Pro Skater 2 is a phenomenal game. Pro Skater 2 may not be the most accurate skateboarding game, but what it lacks in realism, it makes up for in sheer arcade fun. You can do kickflips, nose grinds, and impossibles as Spider-Man in space with edgy 90s nu metal playing in the background, and that's really all I have to say to sell you on this game. There are definitely games that I'd say are better than Pro Skater 2, but with each level of this game being a playground for you to mess around in, this game is definitely one of the best at being easy to start up and enjoy. At number 19, we have GoldenEye 007. While FPS games definitely existed before GoldenEye, FPSs on consoles were far less prominent. A lot of them were also ports of PC games. GoldenEye on the N64, however, was a completely new FPS designed for a home console, and it made the game special. To be honest, I didn't grow up with this game. I actually have a lot more memories with the 2010 remake, which is a really solid first-person shooter on the Wii. I think this list that IGN made factored in the game's impact heavily, as while GoldenEye on the N64 is one of the most impactful FPS games, in terms of quality, I definitely think there are better FPSs out there than this one. At number 18, we have Grand Theft Auto 3. Talk about a game with impact. It seemed like everyone in the early 2000s was trying to make the next GTA with an open world, cars, and an adult sense of humor. The IGN list does give every game a reason why it was included on the list, and for GTA 3, the IGN writer called GTA 3 arguably the biggest gaming phenomenon of the past decade. Let's actually do the math on that. 10 years before 2003 was 1993, and there were some really big sensations in gaming from 1993 to 2003, like Doom, Final Fantasy VII, and Pokemon, just to name a few. But hey, GTA 3 definitely deserves to be in that conversation. The mission-based sandbox formula that GTA 3 pioneered can still be seen in games today, like the Far Cry series, the Zelda series, and the Yakuza series. While I'd pick San Andreas or GTA 5 over GTA 3, those games weren't out yet, so I could certainly see why this game would get picked. Vice City did actually come out near the end of 2002, so that game was available to be on the list, but I guess IGN figured GTA 3 was the more influential game. At number 17, we have Castlevania Symphony of the Night. This game is a legendary Metroidvania title. Heck, this game is half of the reason why we call these types of exploration-focused platformers Metroidvanias. Actually, I wonder if the term Metroidvania even existed back in 2003, cause I would have figured that the term would have at least been mentioned on this list if it did. In any case, I don't have much to say about this one. The sprite work is great, the music is great, and it helped define an entire subgenre of video games. What's really impressive is that even nowadays, Symphony of the Night is still considered by many to be one of the best titles in the entire subgenre. At number 16, we have NHL 94? Okay, this was the first entry on the list that had me scratching my head, but apparently this is a beloved game amongst hockey fans. There's a nearly hour-long documentary by Noclip that goes into the history and development of the game. If you're interested, I'll leave a link to it in the description. But to briefly go over what made this game special, it was the first game in EA's NHL series to incorporate real players and teams into the game. While I'm not a hockey guy, as a sports fan myself, getting to play as your favorite team in real life in a video game is awesome. NHL 94 also added a number of new features and mechanics, like one-timers, which keeps up the game's pace by allowing you to take a shot right after a pass. The game even had a 4-player multiplayer mode if you had a multi-tap for added chaos. It was a surprise to see a sports game this high up, but I do like the variety of this list. At number 15, we have Civilization 2. I don't have any experience with the older Civ games, I've only played Civ 5, but boy was that game addicting for me. Civ 2, like the other Civ games, is a simulation game where you start from the primitive days of humanity and build up your nation via advancements in science, weapons, and technology. Other civilizations exist in the world, and it's up to you to either coexist in harmony with them or go into an all-out war. Like I mentioned earlier, I don't have any experience with Civ 2, so I can't speak on it too much, but it's cool to get some PC representation on this list. At number 14, we have Super Mario Kart. This game popularized the kart racing subgenre of games. Since Super Mario Kart released, numerous franchises have tried their hand at multiplayer-focused racing games with zany tracks and crazy items. Honestly though, I wouldn't even call Super Mario Kart the best Mario Kart game. In fact, it's probably one of the ones I'd go back to the least. To be fair though, at the time this list came out back in 2003, most of the games in the franchise weren't out yet. The only other games that had been released at that point were Super Circuit and 64. Double Dash wouldn't be released until later in the year. For me, I'd personally take 64 over Super Mario Kart, but the original still does have some fun to be had, and like I mentioned before, the impact of each game played a big part in this IGN list. At number 13, we have Miss Pac-Man. I was really surprised to see that Miss Pac-Man made this top 100 list, but the original Pac-Man didn't. I will say I do think Miss Pac-Man is the better game. Miss Pac-Man definitely added a lot of improvements to the first game, like better presentation, improved difficulty, new levels, and the game is quite notable for being one of the first game mods that was turned into an official game. However, picking a mod over the original game is a little blasphemous, especially if they've already set the precedent that impact is weighed heavily on this list. And the original Pac-Man is easily way more impactful than Miss Pac-Man. Pac-Man was a worldwide phenomenon. It proved that video games could be enjoyed by everyone, everywhere. It's one of the best-selling games of all time, and Pac-Man became one of the very first video game mascots. I don't know, choosing Miss Pac-Man was a little... At number 12, we have Chrono Trigger. Chrono Trigger is a great RPG that took the action time battle system of the Super Nintendo Final Fantasy games and made it even more dynamic and fun with area of effect attacks and team special attacks. The game has a really impressive story focused on time travel across different eras. The choices that you make actually affect what happens in the game, and there's loads of different endings. The music is fantastic thanks to Yasunori Mitsuda and Nobuo Uematsu, and the character designs are impeccable thanks to the mangaka legend Akira Toriyama. Rest in peace. At number 11, we have Star Wars TIE Fighter, a spaceship battle simulation game. I honestly don't have any experience with this game. When it comes to Star Wars games, I'm more of a Battlefront and Lego Star Wars guy. But the IGN list praised TIE Fighter for its flight mechanics and interesting narrative that takes place between Star Wars Episode 5 and 6. But instead of being focused on the rebel heroes, this game takes place from the perspective of the villains of the series, in that you take control of an Imperial pilot. I do enjoy a good space combat game, so I'll have to give this one a try one of these days. Next, we move on to the top 10. At number 10, we have Street Fighter 2. This is a game that I've talked about plenty on this channel, but I have to reiterate just how amazing this game is. The one-on-one fighting game blueprint that Street Fighter 2 laid out is still the basis that just about every fighting game today uses. An emphasis on multiplayer, several wacky playable characters, multiple strengths of attacks from light to heavy, unique special moves, combos. A lot of these things existed before Street Fighter 2. Heck, Street Fighter 1 had most of this stuff, but Street Fighter 2 definitely refined and popularized those ideas. IGN specifically chose the original 1991 Street Fighter 2, and while I do think the OG version is still fun, I'd easily pick any of the updated versions over the original, Hyper Fighting, the new challengers, and especially Super Turbo. Whatever version you pick though, SF2 helped to define fighting games and the competitive video game scene that we know today. Next is number 9, and here we have Final Fantasy IV, which was originally called Final Fantasy II in North America, as the original Final Fantasy II and III weren't released in the West until much later. Final Fantasy IV introduced the active time battle system that I talked about earlier with Chrono Trigger, and this introduction was a big moment for the series. Instead of having an infinite amount of time to think about your strategy and make your next move, each person in a battle could act once their action meter filled up, making battles more fast-paced and dynamic. The Final Fantasy series continued to use ATB for years until finally going real-time with Final Fantasy XV. But the idea of cooldown voxel-based battles is something that can be seen in numerous games of varying genres. For its time, Final Fantasy IV's narrative was complex and it showed the potential for storytelling in games. Final Fantasy IV is undoubtedly one of the most influential RPGs ever made, but I am a little surprised that this game beat out Final Fantasy VI and Final Fantasy VII. Final Fantasy VII didn't even make the top 100 list, but somehow Final Fantasy X did. In terms of cultural impact, I'd argue Final Fantasy VII is probably number 1 in the franchise. At number 8, we have XCOM UFO Defense. This one is a tad out of my wheelhouse. I've played the remake of this game, XCOM Enemy Unknown, but that's the extent of my knowledge surrounding the franchise. Enemy Unknown wouldn't come out for another 9 years after this list was released though, so not much you can do there. UFO Defense is a strategy game where you fight against aliens by commanding your various troops in battle. Your troops are expendable soldiers who can die at any time, and once they die, they're gone for good, making your overall battle strength weaker. It adds a real level of danger and makes the stakes of each encounter much higher. The game was really deep and complex for its time, with various mechanics like an in-game time calendar system, voxel-based maps, and destructible environments. While not the first tactical game, this game would inspire many other strategy and tactical RPGs of the future. At number 7, we have Starcraft, another strategy game, but unlike XCOM, Starcraft functions in real time instead of being turn-based, making the game more hectic and reliant on reaction time. To be honest, like UFO Defense, this game is out of my wheelhouse. My Starcraft experience is limited to the SC2V and don't forget our esports dream visual novel duology, so I won't pretend to know what I'm talking about here. What I do know about Starcraft is that it's insanely popular in South Korea. Starcraft was a really influential game, and like Street Fighter 2, its popularity led to tons of people competing in the game to see who's the top dog. People wanted to see the best of the best go at it, leading to big tournaments with prize money and televised events. All of this eventually led to the professional esports scene that we know today, so Starcraft's impact can't be overlooked. At number 6, we have The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. This game is one of my favorite Zeldas, so it's cool to see that it made it this high on the list. Personally, I'm not the biggest fan of the original Zelda. I find it way too open-ended and cryptic to be enjoyable without some sort of guide on your first time. But A Link to the Past, I feel, managed to give you the freedom to explore while at the same time giving you guidance to keep you on the right track. You've got all sorts of cool weapons to use, fun dungeons to explore, and a number of puzzles to solve. I think every Zelda game has its ups and downs, but A Link to the Past manages to be solid in almost every way. Moving on to the top 5. At number 5, we have Super Mario 64. No surprise that this one made the list. It pioneered the 3D platformer and helped define 3D gaming in general. Each level is a fun sandbox for you to explore. The game, while visually outdated, is still bright and colorful. The soundtrack is iconic. This may not be my personal favorite 3D Mario game, but I still really enjoy it and I respect it so much. At number 4, we have Tetris. Tetris is easily the most popular puzzle game ever. It's so simple. Just fill up a row with blocks to blow them up and earn points. But it's so much fun to play. It's the ultimate time waster game thanks to how easy it is to pick up and play. There are a ton of different versions of Tetris, some better than others, but like the IGN page mentions, Tetris is Tetris. No matter which version you choose, it's probably gonna be a lot of fun. The fact that such a simple game is still so popular today shows how ubiquitous it is. Tetris is the definition of timeless. Now, things get really interesting with the top 3. At number 3, we have Super Metroid. Just like with the Zelda series, the Metroid series already had 2 games in the series before the entry on the Super Nintendo came out. But man, did the Super Nintendo game really knock it out of the park. Super Metroid, like Symphony of the Night, helped set the standard for the Metroidvania genre. The environmental storytelling, the dark, lonely atmosphere, and the massive world to explore are amazing. You can feel this game's influence on games today, like the Soul series, which then went on to inspire numerous other games. While I do enjoy other Metroid games and other Metroidvanias, Super Metroid is one that will always hold a special place in my heart. At number 2, we have The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. Ocarina of Time is probably my favorite Zelda game. It was a landmark title in the evolution of action games with its Z-targeting lock-on and dodging mechanics. Its world has so many cool characters and locations filled with personality, and the fact that you could time travel to see how each area changed over time allows you to appreciate each place more. The water dungeons sucked, obviously, but most of the other dungeons were cool to traverse with interesting gimmicks and enemies. In terms of presentation, visually I don't think the game has aged very well, but the music is still top tier. Overall, Ocarina of Time is a great title that deserves a spot on this list. Finally, the #1 best video game of all time according to IGN's 2003 list is Super Mario Bros. Let's face it, it was either going to be a Mario game or a Zelda game, and in terms of just overall influence, I definitely think Super Mario Bros. Edges it out. This game solidified the idea of the platformer genre. To say that the music is memorable would be the understatement of the century. I do think that there were some good little jingles before Super Mario Bros., but the World 1-1 theme is probably the first really memorable song in gaming, and is still probably the most iconic video game song ever. This game helped save the video game industry after the crash in 1983. Personally, I'd take plenty of Mario games over the original Super Mario Bros. Like Mario 3, World, and 64, but the game is still a blast to play. You really can't talk about the history of video games without talking about Mario, and Super Mario Bros. Is probably the most important Mario game out there. So, now that we've gone through the list, what do I think about it? Well, I think the list is alright. On the front page of the site that this list is on, IGN claims that they took into account things like impact, game design, and overall fun factors, so I can definitely see why they made the picks that they did. However, there were a number of really glaring snubs. Alas, this isn't the worst list I've seen, so I won't say that this one is too bad, especially for one made back in 2003. A lot of the games on this list are still seen on best games of all time lists to this day, so I think this list hasn't aged too badly. If you all want me to look at another old best games of all time list like this, let me know in the comments. But that's about all I have to say for today. Thanks for watching, y'all, and have a great rest of your day.